Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my friends, wherever you might be. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Reed. In this video, I'm going to review the props that I'm using in the first book of Strength of Thousands, the Pathfinder 2 Adventure Path by Paizo. Two of those props are specific to the campaign, but one is a tool that I think you can use in any campaign across any system to draw your players into your world. To me, props are all about expanding the number of senses that your players can use to experience the story that you're all telling together. They can see and touch objects just as their character would, which pulls them that much closer into the world that you're building. Because of that, I look for every opportunity I can to include simple props in as many different pieces of the narrative as possible. Even if your table isn't big on always speaking in character, I think it can be a great opportunity to start to blur the lines between player and PC and bring everyone together in that shared storytelling. The first prop that I use in Strength of Thousands, and probably the easiest and most common prop that you can use at your table, is handing the players a piece of paper. This already starts to break down some of those limitations, and now the players can feel what their characters are feeling, and as they're reading through the parchment, they can read and see what their characters are seeing. As I described in my video in the opening scenes of my Strength of Thousands campaign, after describing the opening scene of the Nantambu docks to my players, I gave each one of them a sealed letter, which contained their acceptance to the Magaambya. Given how widely letters are used in tabletop RPGs, there are many different styles and techniques that GMs can use, from just printing on a plain white piece of paper to handing handcrafted aged parchment over to the players that you're cooking up in your oven. The method I use is somewhere in between. I picked up a pack of pre-printed paper with an aged parchment background, which I use for all of my letters and in-world notes that I give to the players. Now, you can find these at stationery stores where they keep scrapbooking supplies, or on Amazon for around $10 for a 100-sheet pack. And then you can either handwrite on them, or you can put them in your printer to give printed documents with an amazing background that doesn't take up half your ink cartridge. For my acceptance letter, and for most other prop letters that I write, I just write them up in an appropriate font in Google Docs. And then I put that parchment-looking paper through my printer just like I would any other normal sheet of paper. When choosing a font, it helps to pick a darker or more bold font so that the wording doesn't get lost in the pattern of the stationery. My finishing touch is to add a wax seal on each one of the letters. Again, there are many techniques out there for creating real melted wax seals, but I opted to use something a little bit easier, which was just an adhesive wax seal instead. Normally, these are made for weddings or other types of party invitations, but I was able to find a pattern that had this set of crossed branches on it, and that seemed like it'd be appropriate for the Magaambya, so I purchased a set of those. It's certainly not necessary to have that exact seal or to have that if you're trying to save money, but the satisfying pop from the player unsealing that mysterious message, that's worth it to me, so I went ahead and went that extra mile. This is the end result. It's a fun keepsake from the beginning of the campaign, and it's one which immediately draws the players into the world and gives them the feeling of their story joining the ranks of many other fantasy characters who have begun their hero's journey, being invited to join some sort of prestigious school or organization. The next prop on my list is the beads that Teacher Ott and several of the other staff of the Magaambya give players when they're first introduced to the school. For this, I purchased a bracelet making kit and some extra glass and wooden beads from a craft store, though again, you can pick these up for around $10 a piece on Amazon. Each time the module calls for the players to receive a bead, I place a handful of random beads in the middle of the table and then ask the players to select one. I narrate that the teacher, whether that's Lumisi or Zokan or Teacher Ott, they extend their outstretched hand and invite you to pick a bead. To me, the beads are a really important symbol of this campaign. It shows the rest of the world that the characters represent the values of the Magaambya, and it also captures a unique combination of steps that each character is taking in their journey to be a magic warrior. Now, don't be surprised if your players actually also turn this into a little bit of a costume that they wear at the table. Mine turned them into bracelets, necklaces. They hung them from their notebooks after they described their characters, hanging them from their staves or from their weapons. And one of my players even began sewing them into a shawl that she wears at the table, just as her character does. It's tons of fun to see how players approach this and add to the creativity. And again, it also gives them a costume that their character is wearing that they can then wear at the table as well, building on those different senses that they're using. Now, I read through the modules, and I didn't see a whole lot of mention of these beads after the first scenes, which I thought was really too bad. So rather than just having the beads be symbols for the new initiates, I also wanted them to be a central identity of the players while they grew their legends at the Magaambya over the entire course of the campaign. So my plan, both in book 1 and then in future books, is to continue to give beads to the players so that they can add them to their strings. And they'll receive a bead whenever they perform an act or a major narrative moment that reflects on the goals of the school. And this is probably going to be around twice per level for my table as they go through some of those major story beats or milestones. The beads may be from other teachers or other individuals around the school, but I've already started describing how the leather strap that the players are hanging their beads on itself also must have some sort of magic in it, because for one of their beads, I described the magic coalescing around the leather strap and forming the bead itself over the course of the character's journey and perquisite. My final prop, and one that I mentioned I think can find a home in any campaign, but I think is really useful for Strength of Thousands, is the player's what I call campaign log. At the start of each campaign, I get a hopefully thematic looking 3-ring binder. I put it in the center of the table, along with a stack of the aged looking parchment papers that I described using for my acceptance letters. I then ask my players to put notes, maps, any drawings, or anything else that they create in that binder. They're certainly welcome to continue taking notes themselves, and most do, but adding some of those notes or some of their characters' ideas to that binder quickly turns it into this amazing scrapbook of NPCs, maps, things that really resonated with the characters, as well as character goals. This is an example from my previous campaign where the players were hired as cartographers to map a mysterious valley. And you can see all of the different images of monsters and beasts that they encountered, as well as the different locations that they went through as they mapped their adventures. Even better, because I keep this log with me between sessions, I can look at it to see what was of most interest to each one of the players after the session ends. Maybe there was an NPC that I thought was a throwaway, but it really resonated with one of the players. And I can take a note of this and be sure to reintroduce that NPC down the road because I saw the player started sketching out the headshot, or they noted in a side margin that they wanted to go back to that NPC later on. For Strength of Thousands, this can also be a great tool for keeping track of all the NPCs that you introduce, both the students as well as the teachers. To that end, the campaign log that I used for this campaign was a picture album, and I tried to pick one that somewhat resembled a yearbook to play into the whole academic theme. I also printed out headshots of each NPC, so that as the players met them, I could pair the verbal description I gave with a photo that I handed them, and then they could put that photo into the yearbook. This gave them a reference of who the different characters were, and I also encouraged them to write notes and information that they learned about the characters in the margins. This is also, I'm anticipating, going to be really helpful when they start getting the different study powers and other abilities that the NPCs offer. They can take notes on who's offering what as they go through the campaign. While it's a little extra cost and effort, I'm really a fan of using props to transport the players into the shoes of their character, so they can see what their characters are seeing, touch what their characters are touching, and really use many more of their senses to transport themselves into the shoes of that player character that they are role-playing. If you have any other props you've used, or you want to share some of the cool things that your players did with the beads that you gave them, let me know in the comments. I'm always looking for other ideas. In the next video, I'll be going through the 5 perquisite tasks that the players complete and some of the different twists that I put on them to, I think, tie them better into the overall plot of Strength of Thousands more cohesively. But until then, thank you for joining me, and take care.